Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Marsha and I'm the Black Thumb Gardener and I live in Canada, Ontario, USDA Zone 5B6A. This week is very exciting. If you've been following my seed starting timeline, we are halfway through our timeline. We're at week 7 of 14 and it's finally time to do something exciting. And today we're working on tomatoes and peppers. That's right. Now, in addition to working on tomatoes and peppers this week, we also have a couple other things that we're starting as well. So of course you can't have tomatoes without some basil. So we're going to be starting some basil today. I started this basil a bit early, but we're going to be starting some more. And lemon balm. That's right. We're starting lemon balm this week as well. So we're going to start off by talking about the tomato varieties that I'm going to be growing this year. And generally there are two types of tomato varieties that you can grow. You can grow tomatoes that are indeterminate. That means that they will produce fruit throughout the entire season and they will grow long vines that will continue. Some tomato indeterminate varieties can be 6 feet tall or more. And generally with those type of tomato varieties, you're gonna have to have a really good staking system because these vines get really long and really tall. The other type of tomato variety that you can grow are determinate tomatoes. And determinate tomatoes usually get to about 3-4 feet in height. They are bushy plants and they tend to produce all of their fruit at the same time. So you're not really harvesting and picking throughout the entire season. You're really getting one big harvest and that's it for the season. Determinate tomato plants are great with just a simple stake that you can get from your garden center, and that's usually sufficient to keep them upright for the season. Now, when I first started growing tomatoes, I had no idea what was a determinate, indeterminate at all. I had no idea whatsoever. I just looked at the packages. I saw a pretty tomato. I didn't even have a plan of what I was going to do with that tomato when I harvested. I just thought, this is popular. This looks great. This sounds tasty. I'm going to try it. Now, over the years, I've realized that for me in my garden, the end goal when growing any type of plant, any type of flower, is what am I going to do with it? Because I really do have a small space in my garden. You'll see that when I started my garden, I have these 2 beds that my husband built that are along my deck. And over time, I've added a Vago bed along the side of my fence. And then I've added another cedar bed that I created. And generally my wooden beds are about 2x4. And the other Vago bed, I think it's 6 or 8 feet long. But that's all I have in my garden. So space is important to me because I don't have a lot of it. And many backyard gardeners do not have a lot of space in their garden to grow all the vegetables they want. So because I have limited space in my garden, ensuring that I am growing the right crops for the space requirements that I have is extremely important for me. And also understanding what I'm going to be doing with that crop at the end of the season. When you are starting to grow tomatoes in your garden, try to have especially if you have a small garden like I do, try to have a plan as to what you're going to do with those tomatoes at the end of the season. So in the first few years I started gardening, I grew mainly indeterminate tomatoes and I had a very small garden and that was not a great idea. The indeterminate tomatoes just were so overwhelming for me as a new gardener because they were so unruly. I bought one of those simple tomato cages that you get at your garden center. I really didn't know what I was doing and I thought, okay, you know, this is tall. This is enough to hold a tomato plant. It was not. It was not. The first year I grew my indeterminate tomatoes, I grew the San Marzano tomato, big mistake. And it grew so tall that in the end, I had to clip the top of the plant just to control the height that it was getting at. The next year I grew Sun Gold cherry tomatoes because I heard they were very sweet tomatoes and they're so productive. These are the most productive plants I've ever grown. But the problem is they were too long. Like I had the vines wrapping all over the place. I had multiple stakes trying to hold it up. It was a disaster. And I had so many tomatoes, I didn't even know what to do with them. So over time, after learning my lesson, after a few years and trying different tomatoes, and I really do encourage you to try different tomato varieties and see what you like. There are so many different varieties. I also grew a green tomato called the zebra tomato. Didn't like that at all, had no idea what to do with it, didn't like it for fresh eating. So I strongly encourage you to try different tomatoes just to see what you like. But over the years, I definitely have refined my choices. So instead of indeterminate tomatoes, now I grow exclusively determinate tomatoes for my garden. And again, that is because I have a small garden space and I'm really looking for plants that can stay within that garden center tomato cage. I don't want to invest more money in getting longer systems or trying to find a way to hang it on a wire or, do anything like that. I want a simple, easy method to grow my tomatoes. And if you're a backyard garden in an urban space like me and you are limited in space, I would strongly suggest that maybe you try growing some determinate tomatoes in your garden. So in my garden, there are 3 types of tomatoes that I like to grow that are determinate. One is going to be a Roma tomato, and the Roma tomato I love because I make pasta sauce now. Last year was the first year I actually started preserving my own tomato sauce. And so I like to grow Roma tomatoes, and I'm going to have quite a few Roma tomatoes in my garden this year because I like to double my yield in tomato sauce for the year. The other type of tomato that I grow is a cherry tomato, and I really like the cherry tomato for fresh eating, but you can freeze your cherry tomatoes and make sauce with your cherry tomatoes. This sauce that I have here was made with cherries, slicers, and Roma tomatoes, so it really doesn't matter. And the third variety of tomatoes that I grow are slicer tomatoes, and it's always nice to have a salad with slicer tomatoes or to use our slicer tomatoes on sandwiches and burgers throughout the summer. So those are the 3 types that I tend to grow: Romas, slicers, and cherry tomatoes. Now I'm going to go through the tomato varieties that I'm growing this year. And one thing I will say is that sometimes the variety of tomato, whether determinate or indeterminate, you can't really find on the seed packet. So sometimes you will have to do your research. Usually I find the website of the company you're buying the seeds from has more information than the seed packet. So I would strongly urge that you do your research first. But again, these are the varieties that I'm growing this year. And again, I have a plan for everything that I'm growing, and I'm really excited this year. Okay, so first we're gonna go through the slicer tomatoes that I'm growing this year, and I'm really excited about this. The first one is this Manitoba tomato. And this one is an heirloom slicer. It was developed in Manitoba in 1956. So the next slicer is Tastyly, and this one is interesting. It actually has 50% more of the antioxidant lycopene. And then the last slicer variety that I'm growing this year is Sunfresh, and I grew this one last year. And the way that this plant grew, I thought it was an indeterminate tomato. Now, it didn't get very tall. It got probably about 4 feet in height. It stayed within its cage. Fruit generally came in all in August. Around late August, I saw just a huge rush of fruit, but it continued to produce through to September. I think I even had fruit in October. This one was so productive. It is a determinate tomato, but I mean, it was just amazing. This was a great slicer tomato. I got so much out of this tomato. Just one plant produced so much fruit in the season. I will always and forever grow Sunfresh tomatoes. So that covers my slicer tomatoes, and then we're gonna go on to some cherries. Now, I do like cherry tomatoes. We don't eat a lot of cherry tomatoes in our house, but I am gonna grow 2 varieties this year. The first is Cherry Falls, and this one has cascading vines. And this one's supposed to be a very productive, bright red, sweet, juicy cherry tomato. And the second one that I'm growing is a more compact variety that produces fruit earlier. And this one is called Red Robin. And this one has not just red, bright red fruit, but it has like this kind of orangey type fruit as well. I grew this one last year. I didn't grow cherry falls last year. And I found more orange than red when I was picking the fruit. And I think I still have a bag in my freezer from this. This was great in the sauce. It added a bit of punch and sweetness to my tomato sauce. I really enjoyed eating this one fresh as well. So if you do have more of a compact space, then I would suggest the Red Robin. And then last but not least are my aromas. And I'm really excited by my aromas because, again, I want to double my canning efforts for this year for my tomato sauce. So this year I'm growing Plum Regal. This is a determinate plum tomato variety. I grew this one last year. It was great. My only regret is that I didn't have this tomato in a full sun space. I just didn't have the space in my garden for it last year. So I am adding 3 more beds, and you're gonna see that video next week of me making the beds from scratch. But I am building those beds because I do want to put this one in full sun, and I think it'll be more productive. But I still got lots of fruit from it, and I'm hoping again to grow more. And then I also grow this other plum tomato, and this is an orange one. And I always find the orange flavors to be interesting. Sometimes I find them sweet as well. And this is Sunrise Sauce. This tomato variety was so great last year. I was harvesting this plant in October. That's right. So if you're looking for something different, you want a different color, maybe you want to experiment with other aromas, then you might want to try the Sunrise Sauce. A great one. These are all of the tomato varieties I'm growing this year, and I have 7 tomato varieties this year. Let me know in the comments if you are growing indeterminate or determinate or both varieties this year in your garden. Don't forget to like and subscribe and drop a comment. Okay, I'm gonna start with tomatoes, and I'm gonna do some labels. And while I'm doing that, I do wanna add a few more tips as you are transplanting your tomatoes in the garden. My first advice to you, if you are growing tomatoes indoors, don't start them too early, especially if you are in northern climates. If you're in a northern climate like me, I try to start my tomatoes around week 7. I'll even push it to week 6, and I'm at the end of week 7 heading into week 6. And for me, this is the perfect time to start my tomatoes. Even if I started tomatoes in week 10 and I start tomatoes now, or even another week past, like in week 5, by the time I head to the garden, the smaller tomatoes will catch up with the bigger tomatoes. So I just personally don't think it's worth it to rush and start your tomatoes too early. There's lots of time. I've even tried starting a tomato from seed in the garden, and I did end up getting a harvest. But one thing you have to realize why we're starting them indoors is because it does take sometimes up to 85 days to grow a tomato and harvest fruit. And generally for me in my zone, I have a very short growing season and a very short window for the temperatures that are great for tomato plants. And therefore it just makes sense for me to start my seedlings indoors and then transplant them into the garden. When you're transplanting tomatoes, spend the extra time to harden them off properly. I find that the tomato leaves are very susceptible to getting sunburned, and yes, plants get sunburned too, like we do. And so therefore it's important when you're transitioning them from this indoor environment where you've pampered them and they're not used to the strong UV rays of the sun, that you're spending the time to slowly transitioning them in and out of the sun's rays. And I do that over a week period with my tomatoes. I usually bring them out in the morning. I do like a week plan. I start off in the morning. I bring them out for an hour. I bring them back in. I may do that for a couple of days. And then by the 3rd day, I may bring them out for the entire morning and then bring them back in. And slowly, bit by bit, I expose them to afternoon sun, because afternoon sun is the brightest, hottest sun that you can expose your seedlings to. And so I gradually work my way up there. The other thing I want to talk about is transplanting your seedlings. So once you have your plants hardened off and you're ready to transplant your tomato seedlings is to transplant them deep. Different ways that gardeners will transplant their tomatoes. Some will just transplant them at the soil level that they were in their containers. Some will plant them deep, some will plant them on the side. For my method, I will plant my stems pretty deep into the ground and give it a good water. There are still diseases that can occur. There's early blight, late blight with your tomato plants. You can also end up with blossom end rot, and that happened to me last year because I went away during the summer and I left my garden to my husband to manage. And because there was inconsistent watering throughout the entire summer, that plant ended up with blossom end rot, and that was a big issue. Okay, we're gonna get started with putting the seeds in the tray. I've already prepped the tray for you. And before we do that, I do want to talk about companion planting. Now, tomatoes are pretty much a companion plant with most plants in the garden, except for brassicas and dill. Do not plant your tomato near brassicas and dill. When you are transplanting these into the garden, just be mindful of the plants that they are not a companion with, because then you're going to end up stunting the growth of your plant and you're not going to get a bountiful harvest that you deserve. So let's get started. So I'm going to start with the tomatoes. I feel like I only have 24 cells here. I might end up doubling up and planting 2 seeds per cell just so I can get the most. And then when I pot these up, then I'll put them into separate containers. And I just do this to save on space. This is the lineup. So half tomatoes and then half the tray of peppers. 12 tomatoes, well, not 12, it'll probably be like 24 tomatoes, 24 peppers. That's more than enough for my garden. So you're gonna plant them about a 1/2 inch deep. And again, you wanna keep the soil moist while they're growing. And then once they have their first set of true leaves, you wanna start fertilizing indoors. Okay, I finally sowed all of the seeds and we are done. Look at that. That looks great. I'm so excited. Thank you for watching my channel. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more videos like this one. I'll see you next time.